What if I told you that the single most powerful human being on the entire planet, at a time when one man could literally decide over life and death for millions, often felt more lost, more tired, more uncertain than you or I do on our worst days? That's not a hypothetical. That was Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor from 161 to 180 AD, adopted son of Antoninus Pius, co-ruler first with Lucius Verus, then alone, commander of the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. And yet, when you open the little book we now call Meditations, his private Greek notebook, what you hear is not a triumphant conqueror. You hear a man quietly fighting to stay decent, to stay awake, to not let the weight of everything crush whatever goodness was still left in him. I've read those pages more times than I can count. First as a young man looking for answers, later in much harder seasons of life, when things fell apart, when people left, when the body started reminding me it won't last forever. And every single time I come back to Marcus, I'm surprised again by how human he is. Not some marble statue on a pedestal, not the wise old emperor from the movies. A real person. Someone who got headaches, who missed his wife, who worried he wasn't a good enough father to the children who survived, who had to force himself out of bed on mornings when he would have preferred to stay under the blankets and pretend the world didn't exist. He wrote in Book 5, Entry 1, and this always gets me. Something like, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for? The things I was brought into the world to do." He had to talk himself into getting up. The Emperor of Rome. Let's set the scene properly, because the myth makes him sound untouchable, and that does him and us a disservice. He becomes emperor officially in March 661, at age 39 or 40. But the honeymoon lasts maybe weeks. By 166, the Great Plague arrives, what historians now call the Antonine Plague, probably smallpox or measles brought back by troops from the east. It kills somewhere between 5 and 15 million people in the empire, possibly a third of the population in some regions. Rome itself becomes a city of the dying. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Marcus loses people close to him. His tutor, Fronto, dies. Friends, likely some of his own household. He gets sick himself, repeatedly. Then the wars. They never really stop. First, the Parthian War in the east. His co-emperor Lucius Verus is sent, comes back sick, dies in 169. Marcus is left alone on the throne, and immediately the Germanic tribes cross the Danube. Marcomanni, Quadi, Yazyges, what we call today the Marcomannic Wars. He spends almost the entire rest of his reign, 14 years, on the northern frontier, living in army camps, in tents, in bad weather, surrounded by death, disease, betrayal, exhaustion. 9 of his 14 children die before him, most in infancy or childhood. One daughter survives longer, Lucilla, but even that relationship becomes complicated. So when he sits down at night with his little notebook and a flickering oil lamp, he's not writing philosophy for school. He's writing to survive. To not become the monster that absolute power so easily creates. And that's the first big thing I want you to really feel. Marcus Aurelius did not write the Meditations because he had life figured out. He wrote them because he very much did not. He wrote them to remind himself again and again and again of what he already knew but kept forgetting under pressure. To not hate people who hurt him. To not obsess over what others think. To not fear death more than he fears living badly. To treat every single person, slave, senator, barbarian prisoner, as a fellow rational being made of the same stuff he was. He had to remind himself of these things because, emperor or not, he was still just flesh and blood, still afraid, still tempted, still capable of pettiness. And yet, he kept coming back, day after day, year after year. That persistence, that stubborn refusal to give up on his own soul is, in my eyes, what makes him worth listening to almost 1900 years later. So, how did he manage to stay, not perfect, but remarkably decent, in the middle of that relentless storm? It starts with something Epictetus taught him early on, and which he repeated like a mantra in his notes. There are things that are up to us, and things that are not. Everything external, the plague sweeping through camps, soldiers dying under his command, betrayals in the Senate back in Rome, even his own failing health. None of that was truly in his power. What was in his power? His opinions about those things, his intentions, his actions right now, in this moment. He wrote in Book 4, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That line isn't poetry. It's a weapon he used daily. When news came of another defeat or another child lost, he would pause, literally pause, and ask himself, is this judgment helping me be the man I want to be? Or is it poisoning me? Most of us never ask that question. Marcus asked it constantly, and he anchored himself with the 4 virtues, the old Stoic pillars he kept coming back to: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance. Wisdom. See things as they really are, not as your fear or anger paints them. Courage. Not just battlefield bravery, but the courage to face your own flaws, to admit when you're wrong, to keep going when you're exhausted. Justice. Treat every single person, Roman citizen, barbarian captive, slave in your household, as a rational being like yourself, no exceptions. Temperance. Self-control. Not letting pleasure or pain dictate your choices. He wasn't preaching these from a throne. He was reminding himself in the mud, in the cold, when no one was watching. In Book 7, he writes something that always stops me. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That's it. No more debate. Just do the next right thing. Again and again. But the deepest part, the thing that really let him solve the chaos around him, was how he looked at the universe itself. For Marcus, the cosmos wasn't random, empty space. It was alive, rational, unified. He kept repeating variations of this idea. Think of the universe as one living being, having one substance and one soul. Everything, you, me, the stars, the rivers, the empires rising and falling, is part of the same organism. One governing principle runs through it all, the Logos. That divine reason, that intelligent order. It's an old idea, going back to Heraclitus centuries before. Everything flows, everything changes, but Marcus made it personal. The Logos isn't some distant god, it's in you too. Your reason is a spark of that same fire. So when you use your mind clearly, you're aligning with the way the whole universe works. Change isn't the enemy. Change is how the universe stays alive. The universe is change, he wrote simply in Book 4. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Seasons turn. Bodies age. Cities crumble. Accept that flow, and you stop suffering twice. Once from the event, once from resisting it. He would practice this by zooming out, what later people called the view from above. Imagine rising up, first above the camp, then above the battlefield, then above the empire, then above the earth itself. See yourself as a tiny point in endless time and space. Your worries? Fleeting. Your power? Temporary. What remains important? How you responded. How kindly you acted. How honestly you lived. That cosmic view, seeing yourself as part of one vast, rational whole, didn't make the pain disappear. It just made it bearable. It gave him a reason to keep going without becoming bitter or broken. But let's be very clear, Marcus wasn't always calm. He wasn't floating above it all like some enlightened monk. He struggled. He got irritated. He doubted himself. He had to fight his own mind every bit as hard as he fought on the battlefield. Look at Book 2, Entry 1. He's literally listing people he's about to meet that day. Annoying ones, arrogant ones, ungrateful ones. And he tells himself, I won't be surprised or disturbed, for I can't imagine a world without such people. He had to prepare himself mentally just to walk into a room. That's not detachment. That's discipline. That's someone who knows his own temper and refuses to let it win. In Book 9, he admits straight up, how many, after being celebrated by fame, have been given over to oblivion? He's talking about himself too. The fear of being forgotten, the temptation to chase legacy. He felt it. He wrestled with it. And death? He thought about it constantly. Not in fear, but in acceptance. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. That line comes from deep inside someone who had buried too many children and seen too many soldiers fall. He wasn't pretending it didn't hurt. He was choosing, over and over, not to let the hurt turn him into someone small. How did he keep coming back? Simple habits, daily ones. He journaled, not fancy essays, just raw reminders. Mornings, get up, do your duty as a human. Evenings, review what went wrong, what went right, what you can do better tomorrow. He practiced gratitude for the small things, breathing, thinking, loving, when everything else felt heavy. He zoomed out when the day felt too big. He focused inward when the world felt too loud. Those weren't magic tricks. They were tools he sharpened every single day because he knew, if he didn't, the empire, the power, the grief would swallow him whole. And that's the part that still moves me after all these years. He kept choosing decency when no one was watching. He kept choosing virtue when it would have been easier to give in. That's real strength. Not the kind that wins wars, the kind that wins mornings when you don't want to get out of bed. Now, fast forward to 2026. The world feels fast, uncertain, overwhelming, just like Marcus's world did. Economic shifts, endless news, personal losses, the sense that things are speeding up and slipping away. But his answer still works. You don't have to control everything. You just have to control your response. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep coming back. To wisdom, to courage, to fairness, to self-control. Start small. Tonight, write down one thing that bothered you today. Ask, was this in my control? What can I do differently? Tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and you want to hit snooze, remember Marcus talking himself out of bed. I have to go to work, as a human being. Do that, and something shifts. Not overnight, but day by day. The universe doesn't get less chaotic, but your place in it starts feeling steadier. kinder, more like home. If any of this reached you, if you feel that quiet pull towards something more solid, then you're in the right place. Here on Etta Wisdom, we're exploring exactly this. Timeless wisdom that actually helps in real life. No hype, no shortcuts, just honest reflection. If it resonated, hit subscribe. We're just getting started, and I'd love to have you along for more. And please, drop in the comments. What's one line from Marcus Aurelius, or one small struggle you're facing right now, that you want to talk about? I read every comment, and sometimes the best insights come from there. Thanks for spending this time with me, truly. Take care out there, breathe deep, and carry a little of that ancient calm into whatever tomorrow brings.